This woman named Riley just turned 28 years old, and she's sitting alone in a cramped studio apartment that costs more than it should, staring at divorce papers that destroyed everything she thought she'd built. 3 years ago, she made a choice that would eventually cost her absolutely everything. A choice to bury the truth so deep that even she started believing her own lies. And the worst part? She still doesn't think she did anything wrong. My name is Emma, and I'm your storyteller here at Mrs. Emma. Today, I'm sharing a story that will make you question everything you think you know about honesty, marriage, and the lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. This is Riley's story, a story about betrayal, deception, and the shocking way karma finally caught up with someone who thought they'd gotten away with the perfect crime. Riley had always seen herself as someone who knew how to handle life. At 25, she was tired, exhausted from the endless cycle of dating apps, failed relationships, and men who played games instead of committing. That's when Kyle walked into her life at work, and he seemed like the answer to every prayer she didn't know she'd been praying. Kyle worked in a different department. He was stable, responsible, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and never forgot to call when he said he would. He owned his own place. He had a steady job. Most importantly, he wanted commitment. Real commitment. Not the wishy-washy maybe someday kind that Riley had grown so tired of. He was, in her own words, boring. But boring felt safe. Boring felt like home. After just 8 months of dating, Kyle got down on one knee and proposed. Riley said yes without hesitation. Not because she was madly, passionately in love. Not because she couldn't imagine life without him. She said yes because she was done with the chaos. Done with the uncertainty. Kyle represented everything stable and predictable. And at that moment in her life, that's exactly what she thought she needed. Kyle was the type of man who brought soup when you were sick. Who remembered to change the air filters without being reminded. Who never gave you a reason to doubt or worry or wonder. He was safe. Dependable. The perfect husband material. And Riley convinced herself that was enough. That safety and stability were better than passion and excitement. But 3 months before their wedding, something happened that would change everything. Riley's company sent her to a work conference in another city. Just a routine business trip. 3 days of meetings, networking events, and professional development. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. Or so it seemed. There was another man at that conference. His name was Jacob, and he worked at their sister office in a different state. Riley had been exchanging emails with him for months. Harmless stuff at first, just work correspondence with a little friendly banter mixed in, a joke here, a compliment there, the kind of attention that made her feel alive again, that reminded her what it felt like to be desired instead of just comfortable. The conference had a dinner event on the second night. Everyone from both offices gathered at the hotel restaurant, networking and socializing over expensive wine and mediocre food. Jacob was there, charming and attentive, making Riley laugh in ways Kyle never did. After dinner, people scattered. Some went to their rooms, others headed to the hotel bar. Riley and Jacob found themselves sitting together at that bar, talking and drinking until 2 o'clock in the morning. The conversation flowed easily. The drinks kept coming. Riley remembers thinking that Kyle would never know. Kyle would never even think to ask about nights like this. What he didn't know couldn't hurt him. That's what she told herself as she laughed at Jacob's jokes and leaned in a little too close. As she let his hand rest on her knee under the bar. As she made the decision that would eventually destroy her entire life. One thing led to another, as these stories always go. And Riley woke up the next morning in Jacob's hotel room, the sunlight streaming through curtains she didn't recognize, next to a man who wasn't her fiancé. She felt terrible. Not because of guilt exactly. She felt annoyed with herself for being so careless, so sloppy. The guilt would come later, but not for the reasons you might think. As Jacob slept peacefully beside her, Riley made a decision. A cold, calculated decision that she thought was the smartest move of her life. She decided that it never happened. Just like that. She got dressed quietly, slipped out of Jacob's room, went back to her own room, took a long shower, and packed her bags. When she flew home that afternoon, she acted like it was any other business trip. Normal, uneventful, nothing to report. But Riley knew she had to make changes. Not because she felt remorse about what she'd done, but because she needed to make sure she never got caught. never put herself in that position again. So she quit drinking completely. When Kyle asked why, she told him it was for health reasons. Better sleep, better skin, a clearer mind. He believed her without question, proud of her commitment to wellness. She also started going to therapy. Kyle thought she was being proactive about her mental health, taking care of herself before the stress of wedding planning became overwhelming. But Riley had a different agenda. She needed professional validation for what she'd done. She needed someone with a degree to tell her that keeping this secret was the right choice. And her therapist gave her exactly what she was looking for. After Riley explained the situation, framing it carefully as a one-time drunken mistake that she deeply regretted and would never repeat, her therapist told her something that Riley clung to like a life raft. The therapist said that if it was truly a one-time mistake, and if Riley was taking active steps to prevent it from happening again, then telling Kyle would only hurt him unnecessarily. Riley left that session feeling vindicated, justified. Even a professional with years of training agreed with her approach. Why destroy someone's peace of mind over something that meant absolutely nothing and would never happen again? It made perfect sense to her. She was being noble, protective, selfless even. After that conference, Riley threw herself into being the perfect fiancée. She cooked Kyle's favorite meals every week. She kept their apartment spotless. She planned their wedding with enthusiasm and attention to detail. She smiled in every engagement photo. She never gave him any reason to doubt her or wonder what she was up to. And slowly, as the months passed, Riley started to believe her own story. The wedding day arrived, beautiful and perfect. Riley walked down the aisle in a white dress that cost more than some people's cars, looking radiant and happy. She said her vows with tears in her eyes, promising to love and honor Kyle for the rest of her life. And when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Riley kissed her new husband with what felt like genuine joy. For 3 years, Riley played the role of devoted wife with Academy Award-worthy performance. She showed up emotionally and physically. She attended every family function. She supported Kyle's career. She made their house a home. And the whole time, that secret sat buried deep inside her, locked away where no one could ever find it. Riley became proud of herself during those 3 years, proud of how well she'd handled such a complicated situation. She'd made one tiny mistake during a stressful time, and then she'd spent years making up for it in ways Kyle didn't even realize. Their marriage was happy because she made sure it was that way. She put in the work every single day. After a while, Riley even started to believe that the woman who cheated wasn't really her. That drunk girl at the conference was just some version of herself that didn't count, some alternate personality that disappeared with the morning sun. The real Riley was a faithful, devoted wife who would never hurt her husband. Jacob became easy to avoid. Different departments, different cities, different lives. Riley never saw him at company events, never had to interact with him on projects. It was like he didn't exist in her world anymore, and that made it even easier to pretend that night never happened. But secrets have a way of coming to light, no matter how deep you bury them. Last week, Riley was working from home on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in her pajamas at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Just another ordinary day in her ordinary life. Her phone rang around 2 o'clock. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was a spam call or robocall, but something made her pick up. The voice on the other end was shaky and nervous. A woman named Veronica, asking if Riley knew someone named Jacob from work. Riley's stomach dropped instantly, but she played dumb. Said she barely knew him. Different departments, barely any interaction. Veronica introduced herself as Jacob's wife, and what she said next made Riley's carefully constructed world start to crumble. Jacob had been cheating on Veronica for years, not just with Riley, but with multiple women he'd met at work conferences and business trips. Veronica had finally discovered everything and given her husband an ultimatum: confess everything to everyone involved, or lose everything in the divorce. Jacob, the coward that he was, chose confession over consequences. Veronica had a list: dates, locations, details about every woman her husband had betrayed her with over the years. And when she got to the conference from 3 years ago, Riley's heart started racing. Veronica knew everything: the hotel name, the room number, what Riley had been wearing at the dinner. Jacob had apparently kept some kind of sick trophy list of his conquests, like they were collectible items instead of human beings. Veronica wasn't calling to blame Riley or start drama. She was calling because she thought Riley deserved a heads up. Jacob was supposed to call Kyle that evening and confess his part in everything. Veronica said she was tired of being the only one living with lies, while everyone else got to stay comfortable in their fake, perfect marriages. Riley tried to reason with her, tried to convince her that maybe they could handle this differently, that calling Kyle wasn't necessary since it happened so long ago and meant nothing to anyone involved. But Veronica wasn't having it. She said everyone deserved to know the truth about who they were married to, and she was done protecting cheating men and the women who enabled them. After Veronica hung up, Riley spent the rest of the day in complete panic. She thought about calling Jacob herself and begging him not to say anything. She thought about telling Kyle first so she could control the narrative. But mostly, she just felt angry. Angry that this was happening to her after she'd managed the situation so perfectly for 3 years. Angry that some bitter woman was going to destroy her life because she couldn't handle her own marriage problems. That night, Kyle came home acting completely normal. He made dinner. They watched their usual shows, went to bed like any other Tuesday. Riley started to hope that maybe Jacob had chickened out, that maybe he'd realized how much damage he'd be causing to innocent people who'd moved on with their lives. But the next morning during breakfast, Kyle's phone rang. Riley watched as her husband's entire face changed while he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he hung up, he just stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then he asked if there was anything she needed to tell him about a work trip from 3 years ago. Riley's heart was racing, but she tried to play innocent, asked what he meant, which conference, which trip. But Kyle's expression told her there was no point in lying anymore. Someone had just called him with very interesting information about his wife and something that happened at a business conference. Riley broke down crying right there in their kitchen. Not from guilt, exactly, but from frustration that her perfectly managed situation was falling apart because of someone else's drama. She told Kyle it was the worst mistake she'd ever made, that she'd been carrying this burden alone for years, that she'd changed everything about herself to make sure nothing like it ever happened again. But Kyle wasn't buying into the guilt and remorse angle. He wanted details, wanted to know exactly what happened and why she never told him before they got married. Wanted to know what else she might be hiding and whether their entire relationship was built on lies. Riley thought his reaction was way more dramatic than necessary. They were talking about one drunken night 3 years ago that meant absolutely nothing to her. One night compared to 3 years of being a faithful, devoted wife who put his needs first in everything. But Kyle completely lost it. He started pacing around their kitchen, running his hands through his hair, asking the same questions over and over. Why didn't she tell him before the wedding? How could she look him in the eye every single day for 3 years? Did she think he was stupid? What else was she lying about? Riley tried her best to explain that she was protecting him from unnecessary pain, that there was no point in ruining their relationship over one drunken mistake that meant nothing. She reminded him that she'd completely changed her lifestyle afterward. Stopped drinking, started therapy, became a better partner in every way. Wasn't that proof that she loved him? But Kyle kept fixating on the lying. He said that was somehow worse than the actual cheating, that he felt like he didn't even know who she really was, like their entire relationship was built on deception and manipulation. Riley thought that was completely unfair. One mistake didn't erase 3 years of being a good wife and building a solid marriage together. But Kyle said he needed space to think and couldn't even look at her right then. He grabbed some clothes and said he was going to stay at his cousin's place until he figured out what he wanted to do. Riley told him he was overreacting, that couples work through stuff like this all the time. But he wouldn't listen. Before he walked out the door, he asked point blank if there was anything else she was hiding. Riley said absolutely not, which was the complete truth. Jacob was the only thing she'd ever kept from him. But apparently, her word didn't mean anything anymore. Riley called her sister to vent, and her sister agreed that Kyle was blowing things out of proportion, that if he really loved her, he'd be able to forgive one mistake from 3 years ago. Her mother was less supportive, lecturing her about honesty in marriage, but Riley dismissed her advice. After all, her mom had been married 4 times, so what did she know about making relationships work? The worst part was going to work the next day and having to act normal when she felt like everyone was staring at her. She kept wondering if other people knew, if this was going to become workplace gossip that followed her around forever. Kyle came back after 4 days, but he was completely different. Cold, distant. He started asking weird, specific questions about her work trips and checking her phone constantly. Apparently, he'd spent his time away doing some kind of investigation instead of working on his own issues. He'd called her workplace, looked up details about the conference, even contacted other people who were there that week. The level of paranoia was honestly insulting. Then he found out that Riley and Jacob had been emailing back and forth for months before the conference happened. They weren't even flirty emails, just normal work stuff with maybe some harmless joking around. But Kyle was treating them like evidence of some elaborate long-term affair. He printed them out and highlighted parts, twisting normal professional conversations into something sinister. Then he started questioning everything else about their relationship. Why she really stopped drinking, why she started therapy, whether there were other men she'd been friendly with over the years. Riley felt like she was being interrogated in her own home by someone who was supposed to love and trust her. The worst part was when Kyle started going through their wedding photos, pointing out how fake she looked. He said he felt sick looking at pictures of their wedding day, knowing she was lying to him even then. Kyle also talked to Veronica behind Riley's back, which Riley thought was completely inappropriate. Veronica told him more details about her husband's other affairs and how Riley fit the pattern of women Jacob targeted. Riley was furious that they were discussing her like some kind of case study. Kyle started individual therapy, and his therapist filled his head with psychological stuff about betrayal, trauma, and trust issues. He came back from sessions using therapy language to explain why he couldn't just get over it and move on. His therapist apparently told him that the lying was actually worse than the cheating because it showed a pattern of deception. Riley thought that was completely ridiculous. She wasn't manipulating anyone. She was protecting their relationship from unnecessary damage. But nobody seemed to want to understand her perspective. The most frustrating part was that Kyle completely ignored all the positive changes she'd made over 3 years. All that time being a faithful, dedicated wife meant nothing because of one night she couldn't even remember clearly. He kept saying he didn't know what was real about their relationship and what was just performance. By week 3, Riley was completely done with Kyle's attitude. He was still sleeping in the guest room, barely talking to her except to ask more accusatory questions. So Riley decided to take control and give him an ultimatum. Either forgive her and work on their marriage like mature adults, or divorce her and stop dragging it out. That's when Kyle made a ridiculous demand. He wanted Riley to quit her job and find work somewhere else because he couldn't handle her being in the same company as Jacob. Riley actually laughed and said absolutely not. She wasn't giving up her career and financial independence because of his insecurity issues. Then Kyle showed his true colors. He wanted her to sign a postnuptial agreement that would give him most of their assets if she ever cheated again. Basically, he wanted to punish her financially for a hypothetical future betrayal that wasn't going to happen. Riley thought that was insulting and showed he had no real intention of trusting her again. But then she made what she thought was a smart move. She agreed to sign the postnup, but with her own conditions. She wanted couples counseling with a therapist of her choosing, not his current therapist who was clearly biased. And she wanted him to stop discussing their private business with Veronica and everyone else. Kyle agreed, and Riley felt like she was back in control. She found a therapist who specialized in helping couples move past infidelity and rebuild relationships. Someone whose whole approach was about forgiveness and moving forward, not dwelling on past mistakes. Riley also started documenting everything during this time. Kyle's emotional outbursts, his unreasonable demands, his refusal to focus on their future. She figured if counseling didn't work, she'd need evidence that he was being unreasonable. For the first time in weeks, Riley felt optimistic. She had a plan to get their marriage back on track. Kyle had his security blanket with the postnup. They were starting fresh with professional help. She was confident that once they got into counseling and Kyle started focusing on their future instead of her past, everything would go back to normal. But everything fell apart during their second counseling session. Riley thought they were making real progress. Kyle seemed calmer. They were talking about rebuilding trust and moving forward. Then the therapist asked if there was anything else either of them needed to share to move forward successfully. Riley said no. She'd told him everything, and there was nothing else to hide. That's when Kyle pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot that made her stomach drop. It was a message thread between Riley and her coworker Marcus from about 6 months ago. Just casual texting about work projects and office stuff, but there were a few messages where they were joking around and maybe being slightly flirty. Nothing serious, just harmless banter between colleagues that meant absolutely nothing. But Kyle had somehow gotten hold of these deleted messages and was presenting them like evidence of another affair. Riley couldn't believe he'd been going through her deleted messages like some kind of stalker. She tried to explain that Marcus was just a friend who she sometimes joked around with at work. No physical relationship, no emotional affair, just normal workplace friendship. But Kyle wasn't buying it. He said this proved she hadn't changed at all, that she was still maintaining inappropriate relationships with male coworkers and lying about it. The therapist started taking his side, asking why Riley hadn't mentioned this friendship and whether she could see how it looked suspicious given her history. Riley felt completely ganged up on and attacked for something that was completely innocent and meaningless. After the session, Kyle said he was done trying to work things out. He'd already contacted a divorce lawyer while they were supposedly working on their marriage. He wanted Riley to move out of their house. Just like that, 3 years of marriage was over because of his paranoia and inability to forgive. Riley reminded him about the postnup she'd signed and how she'd shown commitment by agreeing to his terms. But Kyle said the Marcus situation proved the postnup was worthless because she was going to keep lying anyway. When Riley asked where she was supposed to go, Kyle suggested she figure it out the same way she'd figured out how to hide things from him for years. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Kyle's lawyer painted Riley as a serial cheater and manipulator, using what happened with Jacob and the Marcus messages as evidence of a pattern of deception. Her lawyer kept telling her to take whatever settlement Kyle offered because fighting would be expensive, and she probably wouldn't win given the postnup. So Riley ended up with barely enough money to rent a tiny studio apartment across town, while Kyle kept their house, most of their savings, and even their dog that she'd picked out and trained. Now, 8 months later, Riley is starting completely over at 28, living in a place half the size of their guest room, working the same job where everyone knows about her divorce drama. Kyle has apparently moved on with his life. She heard through mutual friends that he's dating someone new, some girl who works at his gym. The whole thing feels so unfair to Riley. She made one mistake 3 years ago, handled it the best way she knew how, and tried everything possible to save her marriage when the truth came out. But Kyle was more interested in punishing her than forgiving her. Riley still believes that some people just can't handle that relationships take real work, and that nobody's perfect all the time. She thinks it's Kyle's loss, because she would have been a good wife to him for the rest of their lives if he'd just been able to get over his pride and trust issues. And that's where Riley's story ends. Or maybe it's where it really begins. Because even now, even after losing everything, Riley still doesn't see what she did wrong. She still believes she was protecting Kyle. Still thinks she handled everything perfectly. Still blames everyone else for the destruction of her marriage. The truth is, Riley never understood that love built on lies isn't love at all. It's a performance. A carefully constructed illusion that crumbles the moment reality breaks through. She thought she could control the narrative, manage the truth, and build a happy marriage on a foundation of deception. But deception has a cost, and eventually, that bill always comes due. Kyle didn't leave because of one drunken night 3 years ago. He left because the woman he married never really existed. She was a character Riley played, a role she performed, while hiding the truth about who she really was. And when Kyle discovered that truth, he realized he'd been married to a stranger. This story makes me think about the lies we tell ourselves, the ways we justify our actions, the stories we create to make ourselves the hero instead of the villain. Riley genuinely believes she did nothing wrong, that she was the victim in her own story. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. What do you think? Was Riley protecting her husband or protecting herself? Was Kyle's reaction justified, or did he take things too far? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Mrs. Emma so you never miss another story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, betrayal, and the lies we tell ourselves. I'm Emma, your storyteller, and I'll see you in the next video with another story that will keep you thinking long after it ends. Until then, remember that the truth always finds a way to surface. Always.